Next on Currents News, millions of Christians around the world are being persecuted because of their faith. Meanwhile, here at home, church leaders are stressing the importance of this Religious Freedom Day. I'm Tim Harfman, and I'll have the story.
Also tonight, the first in a special Currents News 5-part series, Human Trafficking Exposed. We dig deep into a crisis that Pope Francis calls modern-day slavery, the silent epidemic right here in New York and around the globe. Also, President Trump says public schools risk losing federal funds if they violate rights to religious freedom. Plus, he's a rapper from Brooklyn who's using his love of hip-hop to spread the Catholic faith to young people. Currents News starts right now. Good evening, I'm Lydia Serrani. The United States is celebrating religious freedom today. The right to live one's faith is the cornerstone of any society, but now it's under attack here at home and around the world. We kick off our coverage with Currents News' Tim Harfman.
Christians are being persecuted as never before in history, making a day devoted to religious liberty a perfect time to spotlight their plight.
Americans could do more thinking about people who are persecuted for their faith. Christians are by far the most persecuted group.
JOOP KOOPMAN of the papal charity Aid to the Church in Need says believing in God costs 11 Christians their lives every day, and millions more are living under the hammer of oppression.
Our estimate shows about 300 million Christians live under some form of limitation of religious freedom.
Brooklyn Bishop Nicholas DiMarzio is stressing that it's every American Christian's duty to fight for freedom when dangers arise against the liberty of worship. He's devoted his entire tablet column to religious freedom, writing, quote, "It is important that we recognize threats to religious liberty and assert the right to freedom of religion and worship, as well as the freedom of conscience." Bishop George Murray is the point man for the U.S. bishops on religious liberty. He argues that for society to survive, religion is essential, saying, quote, "A culture of religious freedom consists of respect for the dignity of others as they seek to live in accordance with the truth about God. All people can thrive in such a culture." JOOP at Aid to the Church in Need warns Christians to never let their guard down.
Don't take it for granted. Pray for your brothers and sisters in all these places where going to church can get you killed.
Tim Harfman, Currents News.
For more now on religious freedom here and around the world, joining us now from Rome is John Allen, editor of Crux. John, thank you so much for speaking with us.
Of course, glad to do it.
Now, we know that around the world, millions of people of faith face persecution for practicing their religion, and it's now on the rise. What do you think is behind all of this?
Well, I mean, for one thing, despite confident predictions in the 60s and 70s that religion was on a sort of slippery slope towards extinction, this remains a pervasively religious world in most parts of the world, especially the developing world. So we're talking Africa, Asia, Latin America, the Pacific Islands. Religion is the driving force of history. It's the most important thing in people's lives. And, our deepest passion often elicits both the best and the worst that's in us. I would couple that with the fact that there has been a growing tendency in many parts of the world to politicize religion. That is, to try to use religion for what are essentially political and economic ends. And often those ends are expressed violently. So that while people will sometimes justify violence in the name of religion, what's actually going on is that somebody's political or economic agenda is being served. You add all that up, and I don't think it's any surprise that we live in a world that faces severe, chronic, and growing threats to religious freedom.
We often hear about these incidents across the world, but it's also happening right here in the United States. And right here in New York City, there's been a spike in anti-Semitic attacks and incidents as well against churches. Is the war on religion moving into the West?
Well, we have said for a long time that one of the reasons to promote religious freedom at home in the United States is because we don't want to end up like some of the places where you see the most egregious violations of religious freedom. Syria and Iraq, for instance, where there has been a wholesale assault on Christians since the Syrian civil war erupted in 2011, is really a wake-up call that we need to get serious about the promotion of religious freedom in the United States, or we are going to see other similar episodes directed not just to Jews, but against all people of faith.
What is the Vatican doing to combat Christian persecution?
Well, critics will tell you not nearly enough, but certainly Pope Francis and his Vatican team are active on this issue. But the truth of it is, this is not the kind of thing that is going to be resolved in the corridors of the Vatican or the General Assembly of the UN or the halls of the U.S. Congress. The promotion, although those are important venues, but the promotion of religious freedom really is a retail level thing. Until the average Joe and Jane out there get motivated around this issue, begin talking about religious freedom in their schools, their parishes, their workplaces, and so on, and kind of light a fire under this issue, this is simply going to be one among countless good causes to which people pay lip service, but very little actually happens on the ground.
I couldn't agree more. John Allen, editor of Crux, thank you again so much for being here with us.
My pleasure.
President Trump is marking Religious Freedom Day by beefing up protections for prayer in schools. He's warning public schools that they risk losing federal funds if they violate the rights of students and teachers to practice their religion. The Supreme Court banned prayer in public classrooms more than 50 years ago, but students and teachers are allowed to pray on school grounds as long as it's done privately. Trump's goal is to end hostility to religious expression in public education. The latest now on the president's impeachment. The Senate taking charge of the entire process today. Karen Kafa reports from Washington as the top House prosecutor opened the proceedings in the Senate.
House Resolution 755, impeaching Donald John Trump, President of the United States, for high crimes and misdemeanors.
The House articles of impeachment against President Trump read aloud on the Senate floor, the Senate formally accepting them.
The Senate will duly notify the House of Representatives when it is ready to proceed to trial.
Thursday's activity largely ceremonial. The swearing in of Chief Justice John Roberts as presiding officer and U.S. senators as jurors. The table being set for the real action to get underway on Tuesday. But the parameters of that trial still under debate.
The leader complained that the House was doing short-termism and rush. The leader is trying to do the exact same thing in the Senate.
Senate Democrats hoping to sway a handful of Republicans to join them to reach the 51 votes needed to call witnesses. It's a move Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell has resisted as he tries to steer toward a speedy acquittal, criticizing the House for not doing their homework.
They sped through a slapdash inquiry in 12 weeks when previous presidential impeachments came after months, if not years, of investigations and hearings.
Also Thursday, a federal government's watchdog agency, the Government Accountability Office, concluding the Trump administration broke the law in withholding aid to Ukraine appropriated by Congress. That aid at the core of this impeachment. In Washington, Karen Kafa, Currents News.
A unified Senate gave its stamp of approval to a new trade deal with Mexico and Canada that the president made a top priority. Trump signed the agreement with our neighbors more than a year ago. It scraps NAFTA, which Trump had called one of the worst trade deals ever. The new pact is expected to create 176,000 jobs and add $70 billion to the U.S. economy. After a long delay, the Trump administration is releasing billions of dollars of aid to Puerto Rico for hurricane cleanup and repair. This as yet another powerful earthquake struck, causing even more damage on the island.
It used to be a community library. It is still a community library.
But where books once were are now supplies of desperately needed items.
The concept is people come and we ask them, what do you need?
Edgardo Cruz Velez is from Guanica. For now, he spends time gathering supplies and seeing what help he can provide.
I would like to stay here, but because it's constantly, shaking, the ground, so, it's making me sick, emotionally sick.
This is the new normal for those in Guanica. They're living in tents outside.
These are people that they're afraid of going back to their houses because they, and rightfully so, they believe that the roof of the house is going to fall over their head, that the house is going to collapse.
They don't know when they'll be able to return as the earthquakes keep happening.
You saw them running, and so we're used to.
People surveying a nearby building ran into the streets when a strong 5.2 earthquake struck.
This is their new life.
This is their new life. Let me tell you what they need. Well, first of all, they need counseling. In terms of material things, you know, what we need are things like if you are going camping for 2 weeks, for 2 months, or for a year.
Scientists are still debating what's causing all of these tremors. They are hoping to get some answers from sensors that were recently placed underground. Brooklyn Bishop Nicholas DiMarzio is calling on all Catholics in the diocese to help the people of Puerto Rico through a special collection at this weekend's masses. He's saying, our hearts and prayers go out to all those affected by this terrible natural disaster. I ask the Lord to extend his blessings upon our brothers and sisters in Puerto Rico. I also thank the faithful people of Brooklyn and Queens for their continued compassion. Bishop DiMarzio traveled to San Juan with Cardinal Timothy Dolan after Hurricanes Irma and Marie devastated the island in 2017. Recovery from those disasters is still ongoing. The money collected at parishes throughout the Diocese of Brooklyn and Queens will be sent to the Archdiocese of San Juan for direct assistance. Anyone wishing to donate by check should make it payable to the Compostela Fund. For those who wish to mail a donation, it can be sent to the Compostela Fund, care of the Diocesan Finance Office at 310 Prospect Park West in Brooklyn. The zip code is 11215. This information is also on the tablet's website. Now to the March for Life. It's a week from Friday. The Diocese of Brooklyn is chartering a bus that will take pro-lifers from the diocesan offices in Prospect Park, Brooklyn to Washington, D.C. It will leave at 6:30 a.m. and cost $25 per person. Now get a pen and write this down. To reserve your seat, all you have to do is call 718-281-9540. That's 718-281-9540, or email mhernandez@diobrook.org. That information is also in the tablet newspaper. You can pick one up at your nearest church. Coming up, a Currents News special report, human trafficking exposed.
Most girls out here are under 18.
Society's most vulnerable, exploited and abused for profit. Our in-depth reporting from the streets of New York, the epicenter in a humanitarian crisis unfolding in every corner of the country. Part one of this very special series, Human Trafficking Exposed, is coming up right after the break. Stay with us. Tonight is the start of a special Currents News series on a growing crisis here in America, human trafficking. Senior reporter TAMARA LAINE joins us now with an in-depth report on a silent epidemic that has caught the eye of Pope Francis. TAMARA?
Thank you, Lydia. January is Human Trafficking Awareness Month. It's a worldwide problem where criminals are using violence, fraud, and coercion to control some of society's most vulnerable for profit. Tonight, we break down the scope of the problem and introduce you to some of the warriors who have dedicated their lives to combating this evil atrocity.
I'll show you, there's like a strip, which is kind of where the industrial part is, just filled with men cruising round and round looking to buy girls and women.
It's a silent epidemic. Young girls, women, and boys trafficked and sexually exploited in neighborhoods across the U.S.
The victims are getting younger and younger.
Kids as young as 11 years old are being targeted by pimps and traffickers.
I really believe that if we define human trafficking, as the business of stealing freedom for profit, that's why it's been so hard to address.
Every day means another day that millions are victimized in the estimated $150 billion industry.
Most girls out here are under 18.
Rachel LLOYD knows the damage being done firsthand. She's a survivor of human trafficking who broke free with the help of a church on a U.S. airbase all the way in Germany. We rode with Rachel back to where she began doing her outreach, Hunts Point in the Bronx.
At night, save for a truck or two, there's no one out here. And so right? I mean, the violence the girls experienced, I mean, and obviously still experience, but out here, no one's literally gonna hear you scream.
And for 20 years, she has been fighting for the survivors lost in the hidden world of America's modern-day slavery. There are over 40 million people in modern slavery around the world. Exploitation that takes multiple forms: forced labor, forced marriage, forced sexual exploitation, and 10 million of those exploited are children. A humanitarian crisis Pope Francis has not been silent about.
Ingiustificabile violazione della libertà e della dignità delle vittime.
Although the problem is global, the dark underbelly of the crisis in the U.S. is often overlooked, a growing problem that many turn a blind eye to.
People don't think it happens here because, frankly, we are the richest country in the world, and we consider ourselves protective of our children.
To understand the scope of the problem, we spoke to local advocates, like Carol Smolensky, who has been fighting for survivors' rights since the 1990s. A fight Reverend David Schilling has also dedicated his life to.
So we have an obligation as faith-based institutions, Protestant, Catholic, Jewish, now Muslim, and socially responsible investors to utilize our influence.
It takes the combined effort of communities, faith-based institutions, law enforcement, and families to fight what Pope Francis calls a scourge on humanity. And although New York City is a destination city for trafficking, what's less spoken about is the domestic trafficking happening right here in the Big Apple, in neighborhoods like these. Young girls and children targeted by traffickers. And it's happening right now in every borough.
We met with Jessica Milton, chief of the Human Trafficking Unit at the Queens County District Attorney's Office. She says that Queens is an epicenter.
So basically, culturally and ethnic diversity paired with access in our geography make Queens a center for rampant trafficking, both sex and labor.
It's a point of origin and it's a point of destination.
The Violent Crimes and Crimes Against Children Division of the FBI work on this on a daily basis. Michael Osborne is the assistant special agent in charge. Most recently, his agents were part of a sweeping raid named Independence Day.
Hold up. What we see commonly is people that don't have a good understanding of human trafficking, they'll say, this is a situation where we have a complicit victim. And they don't understand really how vulnerable this victim was.
They typically target immigrants, children, people with little family or social support systems, people with psychological or emotional problems.
Catholic women of faith are at the forefront. Like Sister Ann Oestrich, who is part of the anti-trafficking network TALITHA COOM. She walks with us outside the United Nations before heading in for a human trafficking symposium and explains some common misconceptions.
In this country, I think we think that human trafficking happens somewhere else.
Sister Ann never thought when she joined TALITHA COOM she would be working with law enforcement, politicians, and organizations like Truckers Against Trafficking.
Human trafficking is a very high profit and low risk endeavor. We need to turn that on its head.
And although there is no official estimate on the number of victims in the United States or in New York, experts say the number reaches into the hundreds of thousands, with reported cases rising. The exploitation is now moving from the dark streets to the dark web. Driving with Rachel, we see just how the internet has changed the once crowded corners of Hunts Point.
In the 90s, early 2000s, like this whole Ave would be just kind of packed. Sometimes on a Friday, Saturday night, like back to back to back, like traffic jams, John jams.
But the demand has not died. It has just gone into a darker, less safe place. And it is proliferating, making the need to combat it ever more dire.
This is a mandate of the gospel, and we've given our lives to living out that gospel and following Jesus Christ. If Jesus were here, he would be part of our networks.
And there are those that will never stop fighting. Taking the lead are the survivors, brave women and men, who, together with advocates, are stepping forward with bold voices and determined hearts to put an end to the evils of trafficking. The United States, along with Mexico and the Philippines, was ranked one of the worst places in the world for human trafficking, a practice that wasn't even illegal until the year 2000 when Congress passed the Trafficking Victims Protection Act, making it a federal crime. Lydia?
Tamara, in your piece, we heard the Queens prosecutor mention how Queens is a hotspot for human trafficking. Can you explain that a little bit more to me?
Yeah, it's all about location. Queens has 2 international airports. It's near a lot of shipping ports as well as tons of hotels. And there's major throughways where you can get to rural areas in Vermont and Connecticut. She also mentioned that Queens is one of the most ethnically diverse areas in the world. And it's right across the river from Wall Street. And where there's money, there's predators.
Incredible in our own backyard. Tamara LAINE, thank you so much. Next week, in part 2 of our special series, Human Trafficking Exposed, you'll hear from survivors who were able to break free, their emotional journeys and how they went from being victims of human trafficking to survivors battling to help others. That's next Thursday right here on Currents News. And if you or someone you know is a victim of human trafficking and needs help, it's out there. Call the National Human Trafficking Hotline at 888-373-7888 or visit their website, humantraffickinghotline.org. Still to come on Currents News, he's known as the Catholic rapper, and he's from the diocese, how he's using hip-hop to spread the faith to young people. That story next. Finally tonight, he's a rising hip-hop star and a Brooklyn Catholic who's touching the lives of young people with faith. Currents News' Emily Drooby reports from Red Hook on the mission of Rattles, the MC.
Praying while embracing his destiny. This Brooklyn native is a Catholic rapper. Rebels the MC, aka Melvin Windley. He grew up Baptist. That changed when his now wife brought him to Mass at St. Patrick's Cathedral.
It literally was at that moment that I knew God wanted me to be a part of the church.
He converted to Catholicism in 2005 and started his family. Melvin was a secular artist until God changed his path.
I had this epiphany.
First through the funeral of gospel singer Luther Vandross, who was praised for his faith.
I want to have a funeral where everyone acknowledges what I did for God and acknowledge me as a good person.
Then through the diary of St. Maria Faustina Kowalska, a 20th century saint who witnessed the divine mercy apparitions of Jesus. He still uses it as inspiration.
When I just open it, I allow the Spirit to just bring me where it wants to bring me. And then I'll kind of sift through whatever I stumble upon, and I'll make music out of that.
We're the real Catholics, never miss a day. Now Rebels the MC is using his faith and talents to help evangelize. He's trying to reach young people by bridging the gap between Catholicism and hip-hop.
I say in the lyrics, I've been kind of slipping, but I won't start tripping because I pray with St. Faustina. So it's I know that I'm going to fall, but I have at least her to guide me and to encourage me to continue to do the right thing.
Translating Catholic lessons and putting them in a unique format. Anyone looking to hear more can find Rebels the MC on Spotify. In Red Hook, Emily Drooby, Currents News.
Talented guy. Now that's Currents News. I'm Lydia Serrani. Thank you so much for joining us because we are putting your faith in the news. Hope to see you again next time. Good night.